Sure, me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it. Unacceptable by any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Let's meet the panelists who are seated around the big green table for this edition, starting with Wendy Wiese from KTRS, the media veteran. From the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, sitting in for Bill McClellan, Mr. Joe Holleman. From the Riverfront Times, columnist Ray Hartmann, one of our founders. And from the St. Louis American and STLmag.com, Alvin Reid. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very sad time here at the 9 Network because we lost our leader, CEO Jack Galmiche, who died this week. Jim Kircher shared these reflections.
The 9 Network this week lost its leader, and St. Louis, a devoted public servant. President and CEO Jack Galmiche, who headed the station for 13 years, died suddenly at the age of 71. Under his leadership, the 9 Network has expanded its service to our community. He championed the American Graduate Initiative, early childhood education, the arts, science and technology, the environment, and more, building a model of public engagement that's now being followed by stations around the country. He embraced new technologies, enabling the 9 Network to expand its programming to 4 channels and to reach new audiences through digital distribution. And he was the driving force behind the creation of the Public Media Commons in Grand Center, a place to bring St. Louisans together. When he came to the 9 Network from Oregon Public Broadcasting, Jack was coming home. He was born and raised here, shaped by this community. He was a graduate of St. Louis University and a member of its national champion soccer teams in 1967 and 69. Just this past March, he was awarded the Billikens Hall of Fame Distinguished Alumni Award. Also this year, he was honored by APTS, America's Public Television Stations, with the Pillar of Public Service Award.
Each of us are provided a moment in time when we are entrusted to care for this treasure of public media, and I often ask myself, how am I doing? It really depends on how well we are listening to and engaging with those we serve. Our mission is simply stated as igniting the spirit of possibility. The reason we exist is to ignite the spirit of possibility in the people of our region.
Our condolences to Jack's family, friends, and colleagues. And thanks to Jack Galmiche for leaving the 9 Network far better than he found it, prepared to continue serving St. Louis for generations to come.
And you know, Ray Hartmann, I'll tell you what, as Jim Kircher just said, that parking lot next door was where we would put our Chevys and Hondas or whatever for a long time, and frankly it was completely nondescript on 3655 Olive, and he transformed it into a little landscape there, beautifully designed, pretty bold design I would say, and it's now actually I think a lasting tribute to Jack Galmiche here in St. Louis. I think people who have seen it are very proud of it, and people who haven't seen it will be really surprised at how beautiful he's kind of transformed this area. Just one of his legacies, I would say.
I think that's well said. Our condolences to Rosemary and their 4 children and family. It's a great loss to us at Donnybrook and the station, but also really to St. Louis and to PBS. I mean, I think the one distinguishing feature about Jack is he really was part of the national leadership of PBS and really elevated our own station as a result of that, and he was a visionary, and he will be a wonderful guy. He'll really be missed.
He was always positive. It's not easy to be a leader, and every time we would see him, he was always incredibly positive. He was unbelievably kind and generous to this panel, to this program. We will always be indebted to him for that. I think his legacy will be the fact that he, at 71, he had a very contemporary view of the media. The responsibility of the media to the community it serves, that is so rare. and the endless possibilities that he saw in a public television station. You know, it used to be public television was Big Bird and Masterpiece Theater. He saw a way of a place of engagement, and that's a beautiful legacy.
Well, you know, when you met him, you would have never known about his exploits in soccer, that he used to at one time work for the St. Louis Blues, and I think other executives, that might be the first thing they say. He was so into public television and the station that what he did before, it just really didn't matter. And he showed that all the time. And like I say, that parking lot, which is now the media commons, I'm sure that'll probably bear his name one day, and it'd be very deserving.
Yeah, and really engage with the community. You can see people out there folk dancing or watching a documentary or doing
Wedding receptions.
Wedding receptions, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. And Joe, you did a very nice job this week in your piece.
Certainly wasn't as acquainted with Jack as you guys were, but he was in the couple of times when our paths crossed here when I was filling in, always pleasant. And there was a line that I wrote in the article that made it online that I had a cut and that Ray had said when I interviewed him about Jack. And it struck me as a line I wish I could have kept in, but he said, and he was a really good guy. And that's probably my impression of him, not knowing as well. He seemed like a really good guy. So condolences to his family.
Very much so.
I'm just surprised Joe didn't misquote me, but he did. Now we're going to miss him.
Hey, Joe, you've also been following the Don Marsh story for quite a bit with a big scoop this week, which we can get to in a moment. But for our viewers who may not have followed as carefully, KWMU, where he resigned just a couple of weeks ago after some colleagues expressed concerns when he told Karen Foss, his guest, that she looked good. They wrote a piece about the story and seemed to indicate that there's more, that Don, among other things, after the Karen Foss interview, told the next guest that they went a little overtime, Karen and he did, because beauty takes precedence. Also, apparently, when Bob Duffy, your former colleague, was hugging somebody at KWMU, Don said, "Hey, get a room," and some colleagues didn't like that. And there were some other occasions, too, where Don had said a few things, apparently, to the assistant for Steve Stenger, Ellen Lampy, a county executive employee, or a county employee, where Don apparently said to Steve, "I'd like to take her home." And he believes his comments were misconstrued, but other people didn't really care for that. And then you find out that he was going to be honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award, which you reported and broke this week.
Well, yeah, so apparently a few months ago, talked to Mr. Marsh and asked him, he said he heard a few months ago that he was going to get this award from the radio station. St. Louis Public Radio has a yearly event where they honor donors and various people who deserve credit for having the year. And the Millard S. Cohen Lifetime Achievement Award was going to Don Marsh. And as always happens in these things, of course, the invitations are set out, and then this comes up. So this year there will be no Lifetime Achievement Award because Don said, "I don't want it," and quite honestly said they'd be kind of silly to offer it to me at this point in time. So that was the story I broke, and I won't comment on other people's stories. I'm never surprised when an internal investigation uncovers no wrongdoing.
Well,
I have to say, I will comment a little on in that I have a lot of respect for NPR, as we all do, but for them to write a story on their own website with a disclaimer that, well, we're in a separate department of the same organization. I mean, if I think as a public broadcast outlet, if there's a controversy involving in the NPR station here, then the NPR station should step up and make an affirmative statement to the public and speak directly to me, or whoever should speak directly to it. And that didn't happen, and I thought it was a little strange to read a story. It would be a little like the Blues marketing department saying, "Well, we have different leadership than the players, so we're gonna put out an impartial statement about some controversy in the locker room."
I will say, but
it's
Ray,
you have the same your same organization.
I generally am taking
And
Don's side in this one, but I thought it was informative.
It was
and
informative,
I thought the
but
station gave new information that I didn't have.
I think the station gave new information that we didn't have too, and I also have heard on playground duty, fourth graders saying, "Get a room." I mean, that's how I think this rises to such a ridiculous, hypersensitive level. And when you have, I mean, get a room, and the beauty takes precedence would be considered manners and a way of trying to make the next person feel less awkward about being delayed or what have you. And I certainly, I don't want to cause any further consternation to the aforementioned, in many articles, Evie Hemphill. But I hope that no one ever has a bad day and comes in and says something like, I'd like to kill the guy in front of me because Miss Hemphill, from this experience, sounds as if she would call the district attorney. I mean, I'm sorry.
Now we should identify her
as
for
the producer.
She was identified in this KWMU report as one of the colleagues who had trouble with Don's language. Right? Correct?
The language is get a room.
Well,
the language
or you
is
look good.
Beauty. That is absolutely so far off the
charts. But Ellen Lampe of the county executive's office did express her concerns, and she did not appreciate Don's language.
When did she express her concerns? When they were writing this article, or before?
When she found out that he said that about her.
Okay, all right. Charlie, I filled in for you and sat in this chair, and I forgot who it was sitting in this one. But I actually said, and if I'm not on the show next week, this is why probably. But I said, like, you know, when I introduced her, I said, like, things are certainly looking lovelier than they usually do. Now, all right, I didn't think anything about it. But if somebody wanted to make something out of that, they could. I think they would be wrong. I know they would be wrong. And I would be kind of insulted by that. And I just like as Ray kind of mentioned, that the whole idea that the newsroom part is in, you know, writing a story about the radio part. I'm uncomfortable with that.
Let me push back.
Are you talking about the time you sat here and you said to Wendy, you look lovely?
No, it was a guess.
4 weeks ago?
It was a guess.
Because it was 4 weeks ago.
No. This was a guess.
No one complained.
Well, let me say something.
This was a time when I was host.
No, they actually did complain. Someone did complain.
Well, Charlie,
did they?
Yes.
Evie?
Charlie, let me push back against Wendy on this a little bit, in that every complaint that every woman makes is not necessarily unjustified. Now, we don't know, and I said it before when this first came up with Don Marsh. We all have great respect for Don and his career. There's no question about that. And I thought the whole Karen Foss thing was just nonsense. But that does not mean that there are no other points of view. And Don himself kind of compared himself to Joe Biden. And I've said I didn't think Joe Biden stuff was disqualifying, but there are people who are having a legitimate discussion that needs to be happened because norms do change, and not every guy who is on the receiving end of something is a victim either. I think there are different points of view and change in norms, so I don't think we should be attacking her.
Did you say that not every guy who's on the receiving end is a victim?
Correct. In the case of on the receiving end of criticism is thereby a victim of an unfair attack. I
think that's obvious.
You should. Well, no, it isn't, because we're just saying, well, this Evie, you know, like we're going to chastise her for her whatever view she has. I don't know the details of what happened, and all I'm saying is I still respect Don.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
All right,
we should move along because we do have other topics.
I'm still available for that Lifetime Achiever, although I doubt that's happening.
And I also have to say, I would be more than happy to interview everybody in that story,
but the sensibilities
who were not made available to us and have gotten no comments. Right. So I would love to visit with each and every one of the persons named in the NPR story that they wrote about it. I would be more than happy to interview each and every one of them.
The sensibilities involved with somebody who actually believes that saying something like beauty takes precedence or get a room.
Those two are different, actually, but okay.
Get a room to two. I mean,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, given the circumstances, I'm sure it was just playful. My opinion only. Alvin Reid, the NAACP of St. Louis County, has endorsed the Better Together plan to merge the city and the county, creating one big 1.3 million. Well, we think it's 1.3 million. The most recent census projections show it might be less than 1.3 million before the end of the day. But the idea is to have one city. So I don't know exactly how the NAACP came to its thinking, but it was in sharp contrast to the Senate, which voted overwhelmingly against a statewide vote, which would merge the two in November of 2020. Where do you stand on this?
Well, when I first moved back to St. Louis in 1995, one of the first things I wondered about was, why is there a St. Louis County NAACP and a St. Louis City NAACP? There was no real answer for that, other than we really don't like each other that much. I found that interesting. Then when I got to the St. Louis American, anytime the NAACP came up and we were going to write a story, somebody would always say, like, follow the money. Somebody's getting paid. And I used to say, like, that's a terrible thing to say. You know what I've learned since those days? It's the truth. Follow the money. Now, you know, these impassioned pleas by the NAACP, executive representative, it was then pointed out that he was fully being paid by the Better Together people.
When he was still standing there representing the interest of the NAACP.
Now that means everything should be thrown out. You know, what he said, NAACP involvement, all that. And it's just sad. It's sad. You know, I am against Better Together. This is a whole separate issue. What went on with this speech and all that is just sad. That's the representation that the NAACP is supposed to be putting forth for African American citizens of this region. That's the best they can do. City, county, start over again, please. It's just bad. It's sad.
And Alvin, I think that's the reporting of your colleague Jeremy Kohler in tomorrow's edition?
Yes, I believe online already.
The optics, first of all, I think most of us on the panel, not all of us certainly, have a problem with the general concept of the state of Missouri imposing a merger on two entities that without their approval, in this case the city and county. And I think the interesting, even though it was non-binding, I think it was 26-5 or some wide margin in the Senate. That speaks to really to what Alvin was saying, that maybe this around the state is not going to be quite as easy to sell, even with a large amount of money, just because people around Missouri and outstate and Kansas City don't particularly buy into the concept that the state as a whole should impose its will on unwilling, counties. But the idea that that Better Together has to be spending money to win the support and affection and advocacy of people seems to be a recurring theme.
That's exactly right. And at Chesterfield City Hall, I mean, there was a standing room only crowd of people who are opposed to it. And they are not being remunerated in any way. Right. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Wendy, I want to follow up on a story this week that really shocked me, and that's when a do-gooder organization which is trying to provide bail to people actually bailed out one fella who had been charged with beating his wife. Turns out he had also been convicted previously of violence, of assault, and two drug charges. So he gets out on $5,000 and a couple hours later kills his wife, according to charges filed by police. This organization actually bailed out a guy who went home and he killed his wife. So what do you make of this?
Well, the executive director of the organization, Bail Project, said that there was no way to have foreseen this tragic event. And she said that this, and it could have been a he, but they said that this would have happened if anybody else had bailed him out. But no one else bailed him out. They bailed him out. Bail Project bailed this man out. And for that reason, 54-year-old Marcia Johnson is dead. And if I understand correctly, she has children. She was beaten to death. And what I found most stunning was Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Her response was, I'm going to sit down with the Bail Project and I'm going to help them better understand. That's the kind of thing that I would expect from a guidance counselor. I think that trying to right societal wrongs is a laudable goal. A historical societal wrongs is a laudable goal. It should never happen at the expense, much less, the safety, much less the life of somebody.
Well, okay, if you want to call them do-gooders, okay, that's fine. But sometimes do-gooders do bad. But please don't eliminate what they are trying to accomplish. Like I said, anybody could have bailed this gentleman out. I could have, just for whatever reason, and the same thing could have happened. I will not hold this organization solely responsible for this woman's death.
He is solely responsible.
Right, and I would also say that while bail is one thing, but what defense attorneys take on some really, really bad people and they get them off on technicalities, or they win verdicts, and they go out and they commit the same or worse crime than they were, being held for in the first place. I think our judicial system can deal with this kind of thing, and it's horrible. Don't get me wrong, okay? But I just cannot look that organization in the eye and said, like, you did wrong.
Well, see, I
think it's supremely easy to look at that organization and say you did wrong. They say, well, this could have happened or that could have happened. No, here's what happened, as Wendy pointed out. They bailed him out. He went home and beat his wife to death. If he would not have been out, that would not have happened. So at least what I would have liked to have seen was accepting responsibility for it. And when you talk about do-gooders, and I understand that sometimes do-gooders do good, but sometimes I think that sometimes is the case that what we look at is in this sort of view of how we'd like things to be, and that all people in jail are the subject of an injustice, and if they could just get free on bail, they'd go get their GED and all would be right with the world. When what you have is an organization that didn't bother to look that this person had 2 drug convictions, an assault conviction, and a protective order had been filed against him to keep him away from his wife. This group apparently didn't know that, doesn't know enough, so that Kim Gardner apparently, as if she were lecturing a college class, has to, and these stories were in our paper online, but they didn't make print. So for people print, Kim Gardner said in a statement that she wanted to meet with their leaders to help them better understand the risks to victims and witnesses when posting bail. If you do not already understand the dangers, you need to not be fussing around in this situation. And why I think that this is a case of let's just look at the feel-good or the do-good part of it. The executive director said moments like this are devastating, but it's important not to lose sight of the larger injustices of cash bail and the need for reform. I immediately don't have a lot of trust for an organization that does not see the beating death of a woman at the hands of her husband as one of the larger injustices.
Okay, there's 2 parts to this story. There is the larger issue of a cash bail system that is broken, and then there is the poor crisis communications of this organization. There's no debating that they handled the second part of that. The crisis communications, their response was not a good one. But it does not follow that what Alvin's saying, that their overall cause is not just, and that they are not the ones that granted the bail, okay? And so their advocacy.
You mean set the bail. They granted the bail.
Well,
they paid the bail.
They paid it, but I mean,
they got him out of jail.
Right, they paid the bail.
They didn't set it, though.
They didn't set it.
I think the judge set it way too low.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
She didn't expect that anyone was going to come around with $5K.
But my point is, the judge set.
That's the way it works.
The judge set the bail.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, but the judge set the bail, not the organization, and which is I don't blame. The point is, it was a horrible, tragic result, but it does not disprove that we have an overall crisis, really, with the cash bail system that is unjust. And so you can easily criticize this group for how it handled the crisis, but also not give up on its mission.
You can easily criticize Better Together for a plan, but in overall you agree with some sort of a merger. So yes, you can criticize the specifics. And they specifically went by this as badly as they could have with the worst possible result. So please don't point out to me that the larger injustice is bail.
Well, there is a larger injustice. There is.
The injustice here is the dead 54-year-old woman.
The tragedy.
Well, then stop saying there's a larger injustice because
it's not larger.
So you're saying that we should
death is larger.
Because of this particular tragedy, and it is a tragedy, we shouldn't be concerned about cash bail as an issue? That's all I'm saying.
I don't think anybody said that, Ray. What I said was this organization needs to be looked at as to what they're doing, how they're doing it, so that apparently we have to give them a Civics 101 lesson so they understand the danger to victims and witnesses.
All right. Hey, final topic of the night. Alvin, Reid, the school board is now going to be elected in the city of St. Louis. As you know, the schools have been administered by an appointed special administrative board for the last decade or so, and so now the school board members will be elected once again. even though test scores have been rising and the graduation rates have improved and all that kind of stuff. Do you think this is a good move?
Well, yeah, I don't think this would have flown at any other school district in the state of Missouri, probably in the United States of America, but it was good enough for St. Louis. I've never bought into that the schools were that much better. Maybe they did improve, but I have no problem with this. I think that I thought it was unconstitutional to take away the elected rights of the people of the city of St. Louis, regardless of who said what about this school or that school.
Well, you know, in Boston and I think Philadelphia, the school boards are appointed by the mayor.
I do think the
But
special.
we didn't. Now, if that was our system, if that's how we operated our school district before the state to come in and say, like, we're going to run and appoint, that I never did like that.
Well, I do think Calvin Adams and the Special Administrative Board, and I was opposed to it at the time when I thought it didn't make any sense. I think they did a great job, the Special Administrative Board. I do think Calvin Adams and the school district have made real progress. And I agree, democracy ought to prevail, but we're going to have to see if this school board is less dysfunctional than the last one.
Right, so guilty and proven innocent on the school
Well,
board.
let's hope they do a good job.
Sometimes democracies are messy. Hey, let's go to the letters, shall we? We heard from Nick Hall of Ferguson, who wrote, there was a caller who said very little information was given to the voters about the cumulative voting system used in the Ferguson-Florissant School District School Board election. That person was not paying attention. We also heard from Anthony Wippold of Clayton, Missouri. Charles Brennan seems to like the idea of concealed carry on college campuses. Suppose an active shooter begins firing in a classroom and a student with a legitimate concealed weapon returns fire. When law enforcement or security arrive, how do they know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is? Thank you, Mr. Wippold of Clayton, for writing us. You can also write us, care of KETC, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. Don't forget your emails, letters@ketc.org, and those tweets, hashtag Donnybrook STL. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, and TuneIn if you'd like to follow our podcasts. And thanks so much to Joe Holleman for joining us this week. We sure appreciate that. And stay tuned because Alvin, Reid, and Ray Hartmann are going to be taking your phone calls next, so don't go away.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Welcome back on a somber night here at Donnybrook and Channel 9. I hope you enjoyed the really nice tribute that the station put together for Jack. And again, our condolences to his family. Let's go to the callers. Let's go to Bob in North County. Hi, Bob. What's on your mind?
How you doing? I'd just like to talk about the bond or the bail. It seems like I'm not sure what the solution is, but everybody says there's a problem, but nobody has a solution. And it seems like poor people get away with things because they're poor. So what are their consequences if you're going to let them out? Just like when they get a ticket in the communities, I know they made a law you couldn't charge more in total than your supposed revenue, but I thought there was community service that they were supposed to be doing to pay for the ticket instead.
Okay.
So I don't know if that ever happens.
Well, Bob, let me ask you, if you were from a middle class or affluent, whatever, are you saying that their bond should be higher than a poor person should? I mean, bond was set for this guy at $5,000. It wouldn't be any more, any less if he were somebody else. So I don't get your point on he got away with something.
Well, they're saying the issue is, why are we giving these bails? Why are they're saying, what should we do instead? They're complaining that poor people are getting high bails. So what is the solution? I mean, he got out. The bail should have been a lot higher because he had a history of domestic violence.
Well, I think the complicating factor
he was going to cause it.
Yeah, and then obviously the complicating factor here is he was in, I guess, for a misdemeanor.
Right, he wasn't in for assault charge, right.
The broader issue is that we're talking about pre-trial, that the cash bail system has been unconstitutionally shown to be basically a system of convicting people or putting them in jail and not letting them out under any conditions. But there's no question that this, which I do think the group acknowledged, that this is a horrible tragedy, and hopefully won't happen again. But I don't know. But we appreciate your call, Bob.
Right. And you know what? We didn't get a chance to mention it on the show. Kind of a separate situation, but congratulations to Tony Messenger at the Post-Dispatch.
Oh, we didn't mention he won the Pulitzer Prize. How did we not mention that?
Yeah, for a series, series of columns on debtors' prison.
Thinker. We should have shout out to Tony Messenger for his debtors' prison, a bunch of columns on it, and he's continuing to do them. And I guess we should have good call.
Right, just say right. So
all right, who's next?
That'd be Max in St. Louis. Hi, Max.
Talk about the school board having democracy return to the city of St. Louis. First of all, Ray, you need to educate yourself about the last school board, that they were not the problem. The stats were trending up. When it comes to the school board problems, it was several boards back where there was a number of craziness. We remember the lady that poured ice water over her fellow member. Of course, we don't remember a night an ex-mayor had to be restrained. We don't remember that because we all like Vince. But the last school board was not the problem, Ray, and you need to look into it, not fall for the okie doke. And it's time we brought democracy back to the city of St. Louis.
Okay. Thank you.
Democracy has been thwarted every which way in the state of Missouri.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Max.
Wait, Max, the last school board was, if you're talking about the one that was in existence that kind of concurrently to this SAB, it didn't really have any, power. What I was referring to was the school boards you were referencing that, and again, I was not a fan of bringing in the SAB, but I do think the result was positive. So, but thank you for the call. We do appreciate it. Max, let's go to Ron from St. Louis. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind?
Well, thank you very much for taking my call. I'd like to mention that this Better Together in St. Louis is like two people getting into the same boat. And to be honest with you, a lot of things like the sales tax, the city pensions, the problems with a lot of things going on with the police, the city workers, and everything that's happening in the city will be the same things that have to either be solved or infect the county. And a lot of the stuff, spending all this money for Better Together when they can spend it to you take care of your boat and we'll take care of our boat. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I mean, it's a lot of expenditure going into it. And if you took that money and threw it at this problem or that problem, now I don't want to tell, Rex Sinquefield how to spend his money, but $25 million is $25 million.
I'd like to tell him how not to spend
it. Maybe that's the way to put it. Not on that. All right. Let's go to Denise in Cottage Hills. Hi, Denise.
How you doing, Denise?
Hi, gentlemen.
Hi.
I'm doing just fine, thank you. I have a question and then just a quick comment. Mm-hmm. My question is, on the bail thing, who decides which gentleman gets bailed out? I'm thinking $5,000. If you had people in jail that were driving on a suspended license, you could probably bail out like 100 of them for $5,000. So I was wondering who made the decision on that. And then my comment is, as a woman, and I'm not that old, I don't think, but I love being a woman, and I love it when someone says, oh, you look lovely tonight. And I love having a door opened for me. And I think women were put up not to do everything that a man can do, but to do everything that a man can't do.
Okay.
And those are just my question and my comment.
All right.
Thanks for the comment.
The judge, I guess, sets the bail, but now who decides of this organization? I don't know what their process is to who does and who doesn't get bailed out.
I don't, and I don't blame Kim Gardner for wanting to help them
I don't
do
either.
a better job. I don't see what's wrong with that. And it was just a horrible tragedy above all else. But to as the organization made, and they did they did acknowledge how terrible it was in their statement. But I think it's Robin. I can't think of her name
either.
But they do good work, and they try to identify, they try to help rectify some injustices. But obviously, this went horribly awry.
Right. And I don't know if the prosecutor's office has they probably don't have the personnel to do this. And in a city even the size of St. Louis, are, how many people are bailed out on any given day? But at the same time, does anybody in the prosecutor's office get a heads up? Like if I come down there to bail somebody out, all right,
I don't know.
Do they get a heads up that they can at least tell me that, oh, by the way, he's got a restraining order and has some violence in his past. We can't stop you from bailing he or she out, but we just want to give you a little heads up. But I don't know if that's even feasible.
It's a good question. All right, let's go to David in Alton. Hello, David.
Hello there.
Hi.
How you doing?
I wanted to make a comment on the bail problem and the person getting out and murdering his wife. I think it's a simple solution. When people are put in because of domestic violence or something like that, they can be bailed out, but they have to have like a 5-day cooling down period in jail before they can get out. And the other part of the problem that can be fixed, to me, I think quite easily, would be communications. Communications between, throughout the entire system. So somebody would know that gentleman was in jail because he committed domestic violence, and he's a threat. So that's what I think. That's my opinion.
Now, this gentleman was not in jail at this time, and he was not bailed out for domestic violence.
Correct. That's
right.
He was in.
But now it's on his record, but this was not, And could the organization did some more due diligence and found out? Yeah, I would agree with that. But he was not in for any type of violent offense.
It was a misdemeanor assault, was it? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't domestic violence.
No, it wasn't.
It's a tough case.
Yeah, it's just a terrible situation all the way around. Okay, we're going to go to Rose in St. Louis. Hi, Rose.
Hi. I would like to know if you could explain a distinction between the opposition we hear about to the statewide vote on the Better Together issue in relationship to the statewide vote that was done when the city sought to gain control of the St. Louis City Police Department a few years ago.
A distinction?
Oh, okay. There was some stipulation why that had to be a statewide vote. And I think it is. I think it ran along those same lines. My understanding is that it has to be a statewide vote because for some reason the state is involved. If you change how the government structure is, it changes what the state's tax situation would be. Maybe more, maybe less, but that's why the entire state has to vote on it. That's the explanation I heard, but I've also heard some explanations that that's not necessarily true. But I think it is the exact same thing. That's a really good point you're making there, Rose. I think they were kind of in the same boat.
Well, they both required a change of the Constitution, I think.
Okay.
And for those of us that have problems with this process, it's not that the state is voting, it's that the state is voting without giving making it enabling legislation. In other words, so that an appropriate state vote would be to enable St. Louis City and County to carry out Better Together's plan. That would not be something I would need, that then it's up to the voters in the city and county what they want to do. That the issue those of us that are troubled with this have is the lack of local autonomy and the fact that it's not enabling. It's right. But it's a good question.
Absolutely.
And they certainly both apply to both required state votes. Let's go to the Twitterverse. From JDR 1949, the bail blunder is proof that a good thing can sometimes end badly. In this instance, it ended tragically. No doubt about that.
Absolutely. Joni, 820-35791. I don't believe domestic abusers should be bailed out, nor murderers.
Well, I think we addressed that. We agree. Holy Star 77 tweets, the bail project, however well-intentioned, isn't enough to address cash bail. How about real criminal justice reform legislations? Let's end this two-tiered system which crushes the poor. Where is our empathy?
You can send a tweet to hashtag Donnybrook STL. And we're going to go to Julie in St. Anne. Hi, Julie.
Well, hello. I just was commenting. I did not realize that the NAACP and the city and the county couldn't get along. I'm just wondering how they would feel if, especially the man that just left the NAACP to go to Better Together, would feel if the state got to vote on whether the NAACP, city and county had to merge.
That's a good point, Julie. Thank you very much.
Very good question.
That put us, it's been kind of solemn here today, but that put a smile on my face. Thank you, Julie.
Jackie in St. Charles, what's on your mind? Try to top that last call. How are you?
Oh, I can't, but I'm going to try. I wanted to talk about also the NAACP and the merger. I mean, they backing Better Together. I just feel like that's just where the politics are coming in, and it's getting to be a lot to try to understand. I feel sorry for the people that's over there that have to try to figure out the real truth, and they're not going to probably get to the truth. And with the bail system, it's always been profits over people. Thank you guys for taking my call.
Okay, thank you very much.
Agree with that last sentiment.
Absolutely.
Who's next?
John in Hazelwood. Hi, John.
Good evening, guys. I'm calling about the bail situation. I certainly agree that the outcome of that particular one was very tragic. However, I think the Constitution has a provision that there shall not be excessive bail. So to refuse bail for murderers or whatever offense is probably somewhat unconstitutional. But one thing that you guys referred to during the program was that there's a bail crisis. I'm not sure what the crisis is. I mean, I think you can't. The purpose of bail, as I understand it, is to let people out of jail until they have been convicted. So you can't keep them in jail just because they've been arrested for something. They have to have a trial and be convicted to be permanently sentenced to jail. But the bail is to sort of assure that they show up for trial. So that has to be a system. So I don't know what the crisis is. Can you explain that?
The crisis is that throughout the country, and Wesley Bell is addressing this in St. Louis County, that in many communities, people are being held in prison before their trial, pre-trial, basically because they can't afford bail. And we're not talking, understand, this person that did this horrible thing is now an accused murderer, but he wasn't being charged with murder or even domestic violence before he came out. And so most people, if they have any kind of means at all, if they are charged with a crime other than something like murder or some horrific crime, are able to get out of jail while they are awaiting trial. And bail is set for the purpose of just making sure you show up for your court date. And the crisis in many poor communities is that a lot of people are basically serving time in jail before they've ever had their day in court.
Right.
Is that fair?
True, and have served longer time in jail than they would be if convicted of whatever it was they were charged with, what a judge would have sentenced
exactly.
them to. So
that's the crisis.
That's the crisis. Jerry in South City. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Alvin and Ray. Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks for watching.
My comment is, I do. I try to do it every Thursday night.
Well, thank you.
Without fail.
Appreciate that.
But my comment is about people that are ruffled their feathers because someone says something that they don't care to, the comment. I was raised in a generation where you say, yes, ma'am, no, sir. I still say that to people younger than me, and if I see a pretty woman and I'm talking to her and I say, you look very nice today. I thank you for, lightening my day, making my day better for me. People are getting too, how should I say, it's on their shoulders rather than in their hearts, you know. And you got to stop and look at the situations, and you can't work the puzzle of it to try to come up with a solution. There is no solution.
Okay.
We're human. Everybody has a comment about someone else. Okay. You know, whether they look good, they don't look bad, you know, whatever the comment is. Okay. And our society is getting to the point where you make a comment, and someone later on down the line in a few years, oh, I didn't care for him doing that. You know, he touched me, and I thought, why the hell? Oh, excuse me. Why didn't you just say something at that time to let them know that you felt bad about it?
Would you agree, though? I mean, we have a lot of, I was thinking about this a lot. The norms have changed, and they're not, it's not always bad that norms change in terms of how you conduct yourself. And I'm not, as I say, I very much defended Don Marsh, particularly in the context of Karen Foss, who I give great credibility to. But times have changed, and I know that the environment we had in office in 1970s and 1980s is very different than it was today. And I don't look back on the 1980s or 70s or 90s and say, well, those were the good old days when you could, you know, be a little wilder and crazier. I mean, I think a lot of the change is for the good, but I think every case has to be looked at individually. And that's the thing that concerns me is a lot of times we're painting everybody with the same brush. Mm-hmm. And but it's very definitely a generational issue. And it's all about the pendulum, but I also don't think we should push back so hard as to assume that everybody that's offended or making an accusation is therefore unjust in their opinion. That's all. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that did.
It's just a pendulum. Let's go to Debbie in O'Fallon. What's on your mind, Debbie?
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
And I was just going to say about the case where the gentleman was bailed out and then ended up killing his wife.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's a sad and terrible thing that happened, and I would think that maybe they would be able to find out some way to be able to check prior charges that maybe the person had been arrested on before they bail somebody out, to see if he's a habitual criminal or something like that. I understand that this time his arrest was not anything to do with domestic violence, but if they had been able to check out his past history, they might have found some, that might have been an issue.
Yeah, and I'm sure the organization will try to be a little bit more steadfast and maybe do a little bit more background on people. At the same time, they didn't set the bail.
Yeah, I don't know.
The judge set the bail.
Do you know how long ago his
do
domestic
not.
violence was?
I mean,
it's really like I say, we keep calling him, but he's not a gentleman. I mean, it was a horrible tragedy, and I'm certainly not. None of us are minimizing the tragedy here. It was horrible, but I'm not sure in this. As I said, I think it's good that Kim Gardner or others want to help tighten up the process.
Oh, absolutely. I have no problem with that. And this
all.
is like, look, this is not the prosecutor's fault.
No.
They charged this person.
Right.
He was in jail.
Right.
The judicial system works that way. And just the same way that I'm, charged with a felony, some type of, violent act towards someone, and my defense attorney gets me off on a technicality or hung jury or nobody shows up to testify against me, and I go out and I turn around and commit a crime, the entire judicial system really isn't scrutinized because that's just the way it works.
Well, and they made the point, the Bail Project made the point that had this person not been indigent, the result would have been, he had the money to get himself out, probably would have had the same horrible, tragic result.
Good point, that if for some reason somebody bailed him out, not them, but somebody,
well,
I think the
if he had been able to bail, most people can get bailed out.
Right.
And so, that's their point. I mean, again, we all just, grieve for the family.
Absolutely.
But let's go to Connie from St. Peter's.
Hi. Every week I hear about the different municipalities meeting and about the Better Together, the merger of the city and the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County. And I'm just wondering, what is St. Louis City getting out of this? I see, everybody's complaining they don't want to be involved, all the municipalities. But what is the city of St. Louis getting from this deal?
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't know. I don't think most people do. There's a lot of talk that it's going to save money and the combined police force is going to be able to do this and do that, but there's just a lot of I don't know.
Well, the city has voted twice with margins over 75% to impose an earnings tax. One of the things the city's getting out of this is that amazing plurality of voters is having their will overturned by one guy, Rex Singfield, who thinks the city earnings tax was created by the devil. And so there's a good question. I think that certainly the African American leadership in the city, many members of it feel that their power and their clout, their role will be diluted by this, and I think they're right about that. I think there's a lot of things that people in the city are questioning about this, the future of the airport. So to answer your question, we don't know what it's getting out of it, but we know
what it might lose. Yeah, excellent point, Ray.
Thank you.
Hey, familiar name, Donna in Afton. Hi, Donna.
Hi there. Before I say what I called to say, I just want to say I'm sorry to hear about the death of Jack Galmiche. He did a great job.
He sure did.
And secondly, I wanted to talk about the bail. Two things. First, it doesn't matter if that guy's bail was $1 or $100,000. With his domestic violence record and the restraining order, he should not have been bailed out, period. And this group should have been informed of that. Either the government, our government is failing, or the group is failing. But I really think someone needs to go to prison in the group or the government for this blunder.
Well, Donna, this is a person.
Ray.
Okay, this is a person who had bail set was in for a misdemeanor assault. Okay,
he was not in. Though.
No, he was. I get that, but generally speaking, our system doesn't deny any kind of bail to people who are in for misdemeanor assault. This wasn't even domestic assault.
This group should have known his record,
well, but
Ray.
But Donnie, we don't. Even if they knew the record, how many people do you think you could have no bail at all for? Obviously, if somebody's arrested for murder, sometimes there's no bail, but usually there is no bail. But we don't have no bail set for domestic.
Record.
Well, I might agree with you on that, but we're not even arguing that. The fact of the matter, but there's no argument. What I'm saying is that they should have done a better job. But the fact that okay, thanks, Donna. Let's go to Riley in Florissant. Hi, Riley. How you doing?
Hi, guys. I'm doing fine. Great show tonight as usual. Back to the domestic violence and the murder charges and everything that's going to be pending. I'm just kind of curious about what the misdemeanor violence charge was on, or who, or did he thump on somebody? And I'm just kind of curious about that. And that's the only thing I've got for tonight. I'd like to hear your comments, guys.
Okay. They could be as simple as got in a fight and punched somebody and they pressed charges, so you're trying to figure out what all happened. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was not in connection with the domestic violence case. And then even if you have a domestic violence, case against you in your past, if you get in trouble for something else, it's still unconstitutional to just hold you. Right. I mean, like, I was driving recklessly 10 years ago. I was, convicted of a domestic assault. Right. They can't just keep me in jail. They can't refuse me bail. I mean,
exactly. And either the judge in this case, I don't know who the judge was, or the bail project could not foresee the future. And all I was trying to say to Don is, we just don't have a system that every time somebody has a misdemeanor assault charge, that we say no bail to the trial. Right. That's just not done. And in this case, the only thing that was distinctive about this is that an organization concerned about cash bail was the one that stepped up instead of the guy's family or friends, which is what normally happens.
Right. And if I had, for some reason, if I had bailed this person out, or I'm a family member and I bailed them out, I am not responsible for him going and murdering his
the
wife.
idea we're going to charge the people bailing them out.
Right. That just,
and they're trying to identify cases where, well, you know what? I think we're out of time.
I believe so too.
Well,
Hey.
again, we want to thank you all for watching. Our condolences to Jack Galmiche's family and great loss, 9 Network, BBS, and we will see you again next Thursday night. Thanks for watching.
Have a good night. Go Blues!